I recently came across a story in my email. While reading it, I realized this story was nothing like the usual horror stories. Most horror stories are simple: a new house, some people move in, they start seeing ghosts, and in the end everyone gets scared. But today's story is different. After hearing it, even I was terrified. This story talks about something far more dangerous than ghosts or evil spirits, something that every one of us may have seen or felt at some point in life. And today's entire story revolves around that very thing. This is the story of a farmhouse in Haryana. It's a very old story from the 1990s. I don't know the exact date or time, but I do know it happened during the 90s. This story was heavily suppressed, and later you'll understand why. Otherwise, someone would have definitely made a movie on it by now. And guys, this is a really special story, so stay till the end. Now the story begins. In 1990, there was a farmhouse owned by a man named Malik. The area was somewhere around Haryana and was a very famous businessman. He had earned massive wealth and owned properties worth crores. However, he did not live in Haryana. He stayed in Delhi with his wife. Only visited the farmhouse occasionally during vacations. Since he needed someone to maintain the place, he hired a caretaker as soon as the farmhouse was built. His name was, for the last 10 years, had taken care of the farmhouse faithfully. Never doubted him because was an honest man. Had started working there when he was 20 years old, and now he was 30, still working as the caretaker. Whenever he needed anything, he would simply call, and the items would be delivered immediately. Recently, had started visiting the farmhouse almost every week, because he wanted some peace and relaxation in life. One day called and said, "I received a notice from the electricity department. Every night from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. there will be a power shutdown. They advised us to use flashlights, lanterns or lamps." Replied, "But sir, we don't have any of those things here. And honestly, in 10 years we never faced any electricity problem." Said, "That may be true, but you still need to protect yourself. Use the money I sent you last week and go buy emergency lights, flashlights and other supplies from the city." Agreed and left for the city. By the time he was shopping, the sun had already begun to set. Waited for updates, but strangely hadn't called him even once. Usually he called every few hours. Finally called him. "Did you buy everything?" Replied nervously, "Sir, can you come here today?" Asked. "Why, what happened? Didn't you find the items?" Said in a trembling voice, "No sir, something feels terribly wrong here. I don't know what's happening to me. I feel like death itself is standing in front of me." Replied, "I was anyway planning to come in 2 days, but right now I'm not even in Delhi. I'm in Mumbai. I'll try to book a flight and reach the farmhouse tomorrow as soon as possible. Until then, stay inside if you feel safe. If not, leave the place. I'll see you tomorrow." The next day, after reaching Delhi, drove straight to the farmhouse. The moment he arrived, he realized something was wrong. Earlier, music would always be playing there because loved songs. He would always welcome at the gate, but today there was complete silence. What shocked him the most was that was nowhere near the entrance. In 10 years, this had never happened. Parked the car and entered the house. He searched everywhere, inside the rooms, near the fields, but was nowhere. Then his eyes fell upon the stable. The fan inside was running. He rushed there and found only buffaloes standing silently. Everything felt unnaturally quiet. Suddenly in the corner, he noticed sitting there, shivering in fear. Placed a hand on his shoulder. The moment looked up, he asked, "Sir, aren't you scared?" Replied, "Scared of what?" Whispered, "Of the thing standing behind you." Instantly turned around, but there was nobody there. He said angrily, "Stop talking nonsense. There's nobody behind me." Replied, "Maybe you can't see it, sir, but I can. It's standing right there." Assumed was deeply traumatized. He handed him a glass of water and calmly asked him to explain everything. Took a sip and began. "Yesterday evening, when I returned to the farmhouse with all the supplies, It was already getting dark. None of the emergency lights or flashlights were charged yet. As soon as I reached the farmhouse gate, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. The road was completely deserted. No vehicles, no people, yet it felt like someone was walking beside me. I unlocked the gate and stepped inside, but it felt like another person entered with me. Later, after setting up the emergency lights, I started cooking dinner. While cooking, I constantly felt like someone was roaming around outside the house. After dinner, I sat at the dining table. Suddenly, I saw someone peeking at me through the window, smiling at me. I tried to look carefully, but the figure disappeared. I became terrified. I quickly finished eating and went outside to wash my hands. Even outside, I felt someone was nearby. Then I heard sounds coming from the fields, as if someone was wandering inside them. I tried turning on the field lights, but suddenly the entire farmhouse lost power. Then I remembered what you had told me about the electricity shutdown. I panicked and rushed to the emergency lights. The moment I turned one on, I saw a tall woman standing right beside me without a head. I dropped everything and ran straight to the stable with one emergency light in my hand. Since then, I've been sitting here. Hearing all this was shocked, but he still refused to believe it. He said, "You and I have spent years here. How can such things happen now? Stop imagining things and come inside." But refused. That night entered the farmhouse alone. He changed clothes, took a bath and prepared to sleep. Just as he was about to lie down, he heard the farmhouse door opening. Then came the sound of glass breaking. Was already a heart patient and got scared easily. He had suffered a heart attack once before. Gathering courage, he stepped out of the bedroom. He saw a shadowy figure running across the hall. "Who's there?" he shouted. No answer. He turned the lights on, nobody was there. He switched them off again. This time he heard laughter. Again he turned the lights on, still nobody. He convinced himself it was exhaustion. But the moment he switched the lights off again, the laughter returned along with another crashing sound. This time the lights didn't turn back on. He checked his watch. It was exactly 9 p.m. The electricity was gone. Terrified, he ran toward the stable, hoping to find there, but the stable was empty. Now he realized had been telling the truth. He rushed to his car, but when he searched his pockets, the keys were missing. Then he remembered he had left them on the bedside table. He was trapped. The car was outside, but the keys were inside the haunted house. Gathering courage, he slowly walked back in. "There's nothing here," he kept telling himself. He reached the bedroom, picked up the keys and other belongings and turned to leave. Just then, he heard sounds coming from the kitchen. Thinking it might be, he walked toward it. Nobody was there. But suddenly, he felt someone breathing heavily right behind him. He turned around. A man stood directly in front of him. The shock was too much. Collapsed unconscious. Hours later, he woke up to voices nearby. His watch showed 2:50 a.m. In front of him stood a man talking on the phone. "Madam, I could only make him unconscious. He didn't get a heart attack. If you want, I can bury him near the fields." Silently listened. 10 minutes later, at exactly 3 a.m., the electricity returned. Jumped up, grabbed a knife from the kitchen platform, and held it against the man's neck. "Who are you?" The man turned around. It was devastated. The man he had trusted for 10 years was betraying him. At that moment, his phone rang. The caller ID said, "Madam." Ordered him, "Answer it on speaker exactly the way you were talking before." Picked up. Immediately said, "Did you kill him? I've already spoken to the lawyers. I'll give you 5% of his property. You wanted the farmhouse, right?" Replied nervously, "No, madam, he's alive. And I think your time has come because sir is standing right in front of me with a knife." Went silent. Calmly said, "If you wanted property, you could have asked me directly. Why all this drama? Come here, I'll give you your share face to face. Agreed and said she would arrive in about an hour and a half. During that time stood there ashamed. Told him, you're just a pawn following the Queen's orders. But remember, the game continues as long as the king is alive. After some time, they heard a car horn outside. Had arrived. Before opening the door, looked at and said, I'll give you 10% of this property if you kill her the moment she enters. Stayed silent. He opened the doors, walked in confidently and said, good thing you finally understood, otherwise would have cut you into pieces. Stood right beside her. Then he quietly said, no madam, I already told you on the phone, your time has come. He stabbed the knife straight through her chest. Collapsed onto the floor, bleeding. Looked at her body and smiled. Then he said to, remember when I told you I had some important work? I sold this farmhouse a week ago. I already took all the money. This farmhouse isn't even mine anymore. I only came here to collect my belongings and inform you. Hearing this, the ground slipped beneath feet. The knife fell from his hand. He sat down holding his head and cried, for 10 years I was loyal to you, but greed changed me. I betrayed the man who trusted me. I even killed your wife. What do I do now? But showed no interest anymore. He simply got into his car and drove back to Delhi. A few days later, the news spread that had murdered his wife out of revenge and later killed himself because of guilt. Also spread that and had an affair. Everyone sympathized with. Nobody knew the full truth. And himself never told anyone what really happened. But secrets never stay hidden forever. Slowly escaped the family, and eventually this story reached us. And at the end of this story, I just want to say one thing. Greed should exist only in small amounts, just like sugar. Everyone likes sugar, but only when consumed in limits. Too much of it eventually leads to destruction, and sometimes even death. When my cousin and I were in our early 20s, we used to go on camping trips all over Colorado. It was kind of our thing. Whenever we both had a few days off during the week, we'd pack up and head out into the wilderness to avoid the crowds. This particular trip happened when I was 22 and was 23. We decided to camp in forest. It was my first time going there, but had been before. I trusted him completely. He was the Eagle Scout, the outdoors expert, the one who always knew what he was doing. I just along. We parked near a quiet picnic area and started hiking into the woods. The deeper we went, the quieter everything became. After about 15 minutes, we found a clearing that felt perfect, wide enough for 2 tents, a fire pit, and our gear. We dropped our bags and got to work, set up his tent in what felt like seconds, while I struggled like always, fumbling with poles and stakes. By the time I finished, he had already started arranging stones in a circle for the fire. We gathered wood, broke branches, and used a fire starter he brought along. Within minutes, we had a solid fire going. The sun was beginning to dip below the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. Then came the best part, food. Pulled out steaks and burger patties like we were at a backyard barbecue instead of the middle of the forest. He cooked everything perfectly over the fire like always. We had beers, played classic rock through a small speaker, and just sat there enjoying the moment. There's something about being out in the wilderness at night. No city noise, no distractions. Just firelight, music, and the trees around you. It felt peaceful. Too peaceful. After we ate, we set up a small folding table and started playing card games. Eventually, we switched to Uno, laughing and over dumb rules like always. That's when it happened. We both heard it at the same time. At first it was faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. And then humming. I immediately paused the music. The clearing fell silent except for the crackling fire. We listened. The sound was coming from somewhere beyond the trees, just outside the reach of the firelight. It wasn't an animal, it was human. Someone walking, humming to themselves in the middle of the woods at night. told me to grab the flashlight. I fumbled through our bags, but by the time I turned it on and pointed it toward the trees, the sound had stopped. Gone. Just like that. I asked him if we should be worried. He hesitated, something I'd never seen him do before, and said, "That's not normal." That answer alone made my stomach drop. We tried to brush it off and went back to playing cards, but neither of us could focus. We kept glancing into the darkness, expecting something to step out. Then, without warnings, a large stick came flying out of the woods and landed hard in the middle of our campsite. Not dropped. Thrown. We both jumped to our feet. Immediately started yelling into the darkness, "Hey, whoever's out there, knock it off, get lost." For a second there was nothing. Then we heard it again. Footsteps. Moving away this time, slowly fading into the distance. That's when I said we should leave. Pack everything and go. But shook his head. Not in the dark, he said, that's worse. Reluctantly, I agreed. We kept our bear spray close, suddenly wishing we had brought something stronger, and decided to stick it out until morning. But neither of us felt safe anymore. Every sound in the forest now felt wrong. Branches snapping, leaves shifting, things moving just out of sight. It didn't sound like animals. It sounded like someone, or multiple people, moving around us. Eventually we agreed to take turns staying awake. One of us would keep watch while the other slept. Took the first shift. I crawled into my tent it up and laid down in my sleeping bag. Despite everything, exhaustion pulled me under. I don't know how long I was asleep. But I woke up suddenly. At first I didn't know why. Then I saw it. A silhouette. A head. Right outside my tent, inches from the fabric, in at me. My brain, still half asleep, tried to make sense of it. I mumbled, "Is it my turn?" The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. I stared at it, my vision slowly adjusting to the darkness, trying to make out any detail of a face, but there was nothing, just a shape. Then suddenly, the zipper of my tent slid shut quickly. The head disappeared. I laid back down for a second, confused, trying to process what just happened. Then it hit me. Hard. I sat straight up, my heart racing. That was. I listened carefully. Footsteps. Walking away. I immediately unzipped my tent and stepped out into the cold air. The fire was completely dead. The campsite was empty. Wasn't there. Panic hit instantly. I rushed over to his tent, yanked it open. And there he was. Fast asleep. Exactly where he should have been. I felt this wave of pure terror wash over me. My whole body went cold. I shook him awake, probably harder than I meant to. "There's someone here," I whispered urgently. It took him a moment to wake up fully, but when he did, he grabbed the bear spray immediately. He admitted he must have dozed off while on watch. That didn't make me feel any better. We decided right then that we were staying in the same tent. No arguments. When I went to grab my sleeping bag, I heard it again. That humming. Closer this time. I froze. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. "Yes," said quietly. We didn't waste another second. We got back into his tent, it shut, and sat there in silence with the bear spray in our hands. Those next few hours felt endless. Every tiny sound outside made my heart jump. At one point, I remember thinking I would rather deal with a bear than whatever was out there. At least a bear made sense. This didn't. Eventually, we switched shifts. I stayed awake while slept, but honestly, I don't think I ever truly relaxed. When dawn finally came, it felt like we had survived something. We packed everything up as quickly as possible and got out of there the moment there was enough light to see clearly. Neither of us suggested staying another night. We didn't talk much on the hike back. We didn't need to. We both knew something was very, very wrong about that place, or whoever was out there with us. It's been years since that night. Has asked me a few times if I want to go camping again. I always say no. Because the truth is, I'm not afraid of the woods anymore. I'm afraid of the people who might already be in them. I was home alone one night when I was about 15 or 16 years old. I don't remember exactly why my entire family was gone, but I do remember I was completely absorbed in playing on my computer. I used to spend entire nights gaming, especially on weekends, and that night was no different. My room was on the first floor, and it was the only room in the house with the lights on. Out of nowhere, the doorbell rang twice. Annoyed at having to leave my game, I rushed downstairs and called out, "Who is it?" A soft, weak voice responded, but I couldn't make out what it said. It sounded like an older woman. I opened the main door but kept the storm door closed. Standing there was an elderly woman with a wide smile on her face, her hands hidden behind her back. I asked if she needed help. She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. That immediately made me uncomfortable. I had always been taught never to let strangers into the house, no matter who they were. Still, I felt awkward turning away an old woman. Trying to be polite, I told her there was a library a few blocks away where she could use a phone, even though I knew it was probably closed at that hour. I was just trying to get her to leave. She kept smiling, but her tone suddenly shifted. She said, "That's very rude, turning away an old lady asking for help." That didn't sit right with me. I told her it was a house rule. My parents didn't allow strangers inside. As I slowly closed the door, she didn't move. She just stood there, smiling. But now that smile felt different, unnerving, almost threatening. A few minutes after I went back to my room, the doorbell rang again. There was no way I was it this time. Something about her felt off from the start. I tried to convince myself maybe she was just confused or not mentally well, but I wasn't going to take any chances. Then I heard it, a faint tapping sound at my window. It was metallic, like something hard lightly hitting the glass. My window was right in front of my desk, but the blinds were down. Still, I had a horrible feeling I knew exactly who it was. My room was the only one lit in the entire house. If she had walked around, she would know exactly where I was. The tapping continued. I muted my game. At that point, I didn't care about winning anymore. I quietly left my room and sat in the dark living room, trying to stay out of sight. Then the doorbell rang again, multiple times. This was starting to feel like harassment. After a while, I tried to convince myself maybe she really did need help. Maybe I was overreacting. So when the doorbell rang again, I decided to check, just to ask if I could call someone for her instead. But when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was a man, probably about 10 years younger than the woman. He asked if I had seen his mother. I told him she had just been there. He apologized and said she had dementia and had wandered off. I felt a bit guilty hearing that. Then he asked if he could come inside for a minute. That immediately set off alarms again. Why would he need to come inside? I told him we could talk through the door. I also mentioned that I thought she might have gone into the backyard since I heard something near my window. He thanked me and walked off down the side of the house. But when I went to check out back, there was no one there. Not him, not the woman. That made everything feel even more wrong. Later that night, as I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep with the TV on, I heard the tapping again. The same metallic clinking against my window. This time, I slowly lifted the blind just enough to peek outside. There she was, standing right outside my window, smiling the same unsettling smile, tapping a kitchen knife against the glass. I dropped the blind immediately and crawled back into bed, frozen. My heart was pounding. It didn't feel real. Moments later, the doorbell rang again, repeatedly. At that point, I was convinced this was some kind of setup. I ignored everything and stayed in bed, too scared to move. Eventually, it all stopped. The next morning, I told my dad everything. He said I did the right thing by not opening the door. Everyone agreed it sounded like a coordinated attempt, possibly a robbery or worse. Maybe the woman really did have dementia. Maybe the man really was her son. But the way everything played out felt far too deliberate. To this day, I believe I avoided something serious by trusting my instincts. Another incident happened when I was in 4th grade. It was the last day of school, and I was waiting outside with my teacher for my mom to pick me up. My friend and I had plans to hang out afterward. As I stood there scanning the crowd, a man approached me calling my name. He introduced himself as uncle and said he was there to pick me up. I told my teacher and she asked where he was. I pointed him out and he waved. She let me go with him. Looking back, that still shocks me. As we walked, I noticed wasn't with him. He quickly explained that was already at home. I didn't question it out loud, but something felt off. We got into his car and drove. It felt like a long time, longer than it should have been for such a small town. I didn't recognize the area at all. When we got to his house, it looked normal from the outside, but inside it was dark. All the curtains were closed and the only light came from a dim lamp. I asked where was. The man seemed nervous and said he was downstairs playing video games. Then he told me to wait and disappeared into another room, heading down to the basement. That's when panic hit me. I went to the front door and tried to open it. It was locked. I rushed to the kitchen and found a wall phone. I picked it up, dialed 911 and whispered, "Please come to this house. I've been kidnapped." Then I hid the phone under a towel, still connected. I returned to where I had been just as he came back upstairs. He called me to come downstairs. I didn't move. When I asked if I could leave, his entire demeanor changed. He grabbed my wrist and forcefully pulled me toward the basement. I screamed and cried, but he dragged me down and locked me inside. The basement was empty, cold, and dimly lit by a single bulb. It felt like a nightmare. After what felt like forever, I heard banging upstairs, loud, aggressive knocking, then voices. Police. They broke in and rescued me. If I hadn't called when I did, I don't know what would have happened. Years later, at a New Year's party at a friend's house, something strange happened again. Late into the night, after most people had left, only a few of us remained. That's when we started hearing a creaking noise. At first, we brushed it off as house sounds, but it kept happening. Eventually, we traced it to the basement. Reluctantly, we went down to check. After searching the area, I noticed a rocking chair. I sat in it and started rocking. It made the exact same sound we had been hearing. But the moment I stood up, we both realized something unsettling. No one had been down there before us. And yet the chair had clearly been moving. We didn't stick around to figure it out. We ran upstairs and locked the basement door. That chair had belonged to his grandmother, who had passed away years earlier. I've never experienced anything quite like that before or since, but it still gives me chills thinking about it.
For a spook, I can still remember the way Dad sprinted at the house, bursting in, grabbing his rifle, and bursting out. A few gunshots later, and he came back wide-eyed and sweating. He described the thing during supper. Most of its body was hidden by the tree, but its face was enough to scare anyone out of any place, he said. The figure was entirely hairless except for its long and thick eyelashes that almost covered its eyes, which were each fist-sized and never blinking. The skin was paper white, its face shape long and pointy. The fingers that gripped wood were longer than the tree's branches, and the worst of all was also the smallest thing. The face wasn't at eye level. It was placed at the top part of the oak tree, almost touching the leaves. When he rubbed his eyes, he saw the thing smile. It was like how chimpanzees smiled when they were about to maim someone. The teeth weren't sharp and prickly, but they resembled a long line of baby teeth that mostly showed the gums, dark red and fleshy. It looked as if it didn't breathe, he said. Dad stayed up after that, clutching his rifle with both hands every night, circling the house. We found him sitting on the porch with his eyes barely open and his grip barely gripping. Mom followed him this time, and they both came back shaken up after a short while. The monster was already showing its full self with its trademark smile and fingers. Dad dumped half of his ammo at the thing. He would shot more if Mom hadn't stopped him. It was like throwing pebbles at clay. There was no blood or any gore of any kind, but you could see the holes that the bullets came out of. That was enough for the thing to walk backwards into the woods, never breaking eye contact with my folks and never showing any sign of damage. It simply walked away. After all that, we weren't allowed to go outside. Mom was in charge of the supplies, Dad was in charge of the defenses, and my brother and I were in charge of not dying, which were the same words my mother used. Dad was now the only one that ever went outside, and the more he went out, the more stories he brought with him. He was in his truck when he spotted the thing standing just outside the house, peering into the second-floor window. When the creature noticed him, it just extended its legs in impossible long strides into the forest. Again, never breaking eye contact. My dad bought long planks of wood and fashioned a rickety fence that was as tall as the chimney. It surrounded the house, leaving no entry points to speak of. Mom was okay with it, being as manic as my father. They didn't seem to sleep anymore. In the mornings, Dad would tap his feet endlessly while also looking around. In the evenings, he would guard the house, circling it with a rifle in hand. This would go on for an entire week until Monday rolled around. It was around midnight when we heard the shrieks of my mother coming from the next room. She was looking at the top of the fence, still as nervous as ever, when she spotted the face staring at her. Dad was already shooting at the thing, gunshots echoing into the night. Mother instructed us to help her with barricading the house, and we did. Every piece of furniture propped up the door in stacks. The windows were already boarded up. Every entry point was sealed, and now it was time to wait for my father to finish the creature off. Gunshots pierced our ears. 1, then 2, then 3. More shots fired until all fell silent. My brother peeked through the small slits of window that weren't boarded up, and what he saw sent him into a hysteric fit of cries and whimpers. It grabbed him by the neck, he said, repeating it, starting from a quiet shock to a panic. Mom was too preoccupied with a sound that came from somewhere. It grew louder and louder, that rumble of noise. We soon found out where it came from. We forgot to barricade the chimney. With a single hand, the monster grabbed at my mother's throat right in front of us. It raised the body with a single motion, and soon her neck grew longer. Her feet were still touching the ground. Then it pulled her fast enough to make her a blur. Her neck was still growing. I chased after her, trying to grab at her feet, but I was too short and slow to do so. When there was nothing left but the black darkness of the chimney and the small hicks and sobs of my brother, a face emerged. It gave a smile and a wink before going outside. I stood there wide-eyed, goosebumps all over, and an overwhelming urge to throw up preoccupied me. My brother's wailing was the only sound I heard throughout the night. When morning came, I was clutching the fire poker for some sort of assurance, with my little brother leaning on my shoulder, still drooling from sleep. We both decided to check outside, and with a little bit of strength, we managed to displace the barricade to the front door. Shovels were in the broom closet, so we took our time digging through the ground to the other side. When we finally got out, we saw our parents lying on the ground side by side, eyes closed and necks stretched to the length of a car. Dad was the only one with a phone, so we took it, dialed 911, and they took us away. Me and my brother were shipped off to our estranged aunt's house that was more of a cat shelter than a home. We stayed there for years up until we graduated high school. My brother got into a whole lot of things after high school. Most were illegal and substance-related. I visit him from time to time in the small rehab center. My parents were alive, believe it or not, living in a facility of some sorts. They only ever talk to me through text messages and calls. I guess they just don't have the heart to show themselves. I came out right for the most part. I have a house in the suburbs, 2 kids of my own, a loving, eccentric wife, and a boring accountant job that pays well. It was all sunshine and rainbows up until the peeping Tom showed up once again. I saw him a couple of weeks ago, inches away from the kitchen window while I was doing the supper dishes, still wearing that baby teeth smile. Now it's been looking at us ever since, never once flinching or moving. It was just a peeping Tom.
The old man who lived on the second floor of our building was known to everyone, not just as a resident, but as a presence. He carried with him a quiet warmth that seemed to soften the edges of daily life. He greeted people with a gentle smile, spoke softly, and always had time for a kind word. Some said he was deeply spiritual, a man who spent hours in prayer or contemplation. Others simply saw him as someone who never harmed anyone, who radiated a rare calmness. He had no children of his own. That was something people often whispered about in hushed tones, as if it were a fragile truth. But he never appeared bitter about it. Instead, he seemed to pour all his affection into his extended family. He lived in a joint family setup with his younger brother, his brother's wife, and their 4 children. The house was always lively, voices echoing, footsteps rushing, laughter spilling into the corridor. Amid that noise, the old man was like a steady flame. Among all the children, he was especially close to the youngest nephew. Let's call him Bala. Bala adored his uncle in a way that was difficult to describe. It was not just respect, it was attachment. He followed him around as a child, listened to his stories, sat beside him during prayers, and often chose his company over anyone else's. As Bala grew older, that bond only deepened. It was as if there was an unspoken understanding between them. The uncle, too, seemed to favor Bala in a quiet but noticeable way. He would save small treats for him, call him to sit beside him during meals, and sometimes spend hours talking only to him while the rest of the household carried on around them. No one thought much of it. It was natural. After all, the man had no children. Perhaps Bala had simply filled that empty space. The day the old man died was unexpectedly still. It wasn't dramatic. There was no chaos, no loud cries at first, just a slow spreading realization that something had ended. By the time word spread through the building, relatives had already begun arriving. People gathered in the house, filling every corner. The air was thick with grief, whispers, and the faint scent of incense. Some women sat together, quietly weeping. Others murmured prayers. Men stood in small groups, speaking in low voices. The old man's wife was inconsolable. She sat near the body, her eyes swollen, her voice breaking as she cried. His younger brother looked shattered, trying to stay strong, but unable to hide his grief. And then there was Bala. From the moment the news broke, something about him felt off. He didn't cry, he didn't speak, he didn't move much either. He stood in a corner of the room, slightly apart from everyone else. His face was pale, his eyes distant. People assumed he was in shock. After all, he had been the closest to the old man. Poor boy, someone whispered. He must be devastated. His stillness began to feel unnatural. People approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder, offering condolences as if he were the bereaved son. He didn't respond. He didn't even seem to register their presence. His gaze remained fixed somewhere far away. His silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, unsettling. As the day progressed, preparations for the last rites began. The atmosphere grew more intense. Rituals were arranged, instructions were given, and people moved in a more purposeful manner. The time had come to carry the body out. Traditionally, close family members were expected to offer a shoulder. "Come, Beta," an elder said gently. "You should help carry him." There was no response. They tried again, this time a bit more firmly. "Bala, come forward." Still nothing. He stood frozen, as if he hadn't heard a word. A few relatives exchanged glances. One of them walked up to him and lightly shook his arm. "Bala?" He didn't react. It was as though he had turned into a statue, alive, yet completely detached. After a few more attempts, the family decided not to insist. Others stepped forward and took their positions. The body was lifted. Slowly, carefully, it was carried toward the door. And that's when everything changed. Just as the procession reached a few steps outside the house, a sudden, piercing scream shattered the silence. Everyone froze. It came from behind, from Bala. At first, it sounded like a cry of grief, loud, raw, uncontrollable. But within seconds, people realized something was terribly wrong. The voice didn't sound like Bala. It was deeper, older, unfamiliar, yet eerily recognizable. He shouted again, "I want Bala!" The words echoed through the corridor, sending a chill down everyone's spine. People turned in horror. Bala was no longer standing still. His body was trembling, his face contorted in a way no one had ever seen before. His eyes looked wild, almost unrecognizable. "I want Bala," he screamed again, but this time there was no doubt. It sounded exactly like his uncle's voice. A wave of panic spread through the crowd. Some people instinctively stepped back. Others rushed toward him, unsure of what they were witnessing. "Hold him," someone shouted. But Bala didn't seem like himself anymore. He lunged forward suddenly, his movements aggressive and erratic. Before anyone could react, he broke into a run, straight toward the open courtyard. And beyond that, the well. A deep old well that stood just a short distance from the house. "I want Bala," he kept shouting, his voice echoing with an unnatural intensity. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if fear had rooted them to the ground. Then reality struck. If he reaches the well... Several men sprinted after him. Catching him was not easy. Despite his relatively small frame, Bala seemed to possess an unnatural strength. When the first two men grabbed him, he threw them off with shocking force. Another joined in, then another, but Bala fought back violently. He thrashed, pushed, and struggled with a ferocity that no one expected. His voice continued to ring out, repeating the same chilling words, "I want Bala." It made no sense. He was Bala, yet he was calling out for himself in someone else's voice. It took nearly 10 men to finally bring him down. They forced him to the ground, pinning his arms and legs. Even then, he continued to resist, his body jerking, his voice rising and falling in terrifying bursts. Some of the older women began praying loudly. The entire scene had descended into chaos. Someone rushed forward with a bucket of cold water. Without hesitation, they poured it over Bala. For a brief moment, he went silent. Then he screamed again, louder than before. His father pushed through the crowd, his face filled with desperation. "Bala, look at me," he shouted, kneeling beside him. But Bala didn't seem to recognize him. Not yet. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing erratic. Another bucket of water was brought.
I live in northern Utah, right on the edge of a quiet highway town where there's almost nothing except a handful of stores, a couple of truck stops, and a small motel lining the main road. Once you leave that strip, the roads quickly turn into dirt, stretching out towards scattered houses, wide open fields, and thick patches of forest. It's the kind of place where everything feels still, where you can go hours without seeing another person. That day had been completely normal. I worked from home as usual and wrapped things up around 6 in the evening. After that, I decided to drive into town to pick up some groceries and a few things I needed for the house. Even though it was technically a highway town, traffic was always light, and the stores were rarely crowded. I pulled into the parking lot, grabbed a cart, and went inside. Everything felt routine until I noticed a man looking at me. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe I had just glanced at him at the wrong moment. It happens. But a few minutes later, in a completely different aisle, I saw him again. This time, he walked into the same aisle I was in, even though it was empty, and stopped just a few feet away. He didn't pick anything up or seem to browse. He just stood there. I tried to ignore it, keeping my eyes forward while pretending to search for something on the shelf. Out of the corner of my eye, I could tell he was staring at me. Eventually, I gave a small, polite hi, hoping to break the awkwardness, but he didn't respond at all. That silence made my skin crawl more than anything else. I quickly grabbed what I needed and left the aisle. At the time, I convinced myself he was just some strange guy, maybe tired or distracted. I paid for my groceries and walked back to my car, which I had parked near the back of the lot like I always did. As I loaded everything into the trunk and got into the driver's seat, something felt off. When I looked up, I saw him again. He was standing between two cars, watching me. He still didn't have any groceries. It didn't even look like he had gone through checkout. That's when a small sense of unease started to settle in, but I pushed it aside, started the car, and drove home. By the time I got back, the sun had mostly set. My house sits on a large piece of land, and the dirt road leading to it is always quiet, especially at night. I carried a couple of grocery bags inside, got distracted by a phone call from my dad, and then went back out to grab the rest. That's when I noticed something out in the distance. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but there was a truck parked off to the side of the dirt road, sitting in the darkness with its lights off. It wasn't there when I arrived. The fact that it was on my property immediately made me uneasy. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone who had pulled off the road to rest. Maybe they didn't want to pay for a motel. Still, something about the way it was sitting there, completely dark and silent, didn't feel right. I kept an eye on it while grabbing the rest of my groceries, then went inside and closed the door behind me. For the next hour or so, I kept checking through the window, but the truck never moved. Eventually, I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Later that night, I went upstairs and fell asleep quickly. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. As soon as I opened my bedroom door, I heard a creak from downstairs. It was faint, but unmistakable. I paused, listening carefully. I had never heard that sound before. I tried to recreate it by moving the door again, but nothing happened. Slowly, I walked to the end of the hallway and looked down toward the stairs. Everything below was dark, lit only by faint moonlight. But then I saw it, a shadow moving slightly along the wall. My heart started racing instantly. I couldn't tell if it was inside the house or coming from outside, but something about it felt wrong. I backed away as quietly as I could, returned to my room, and shut the door as gently as possible. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called the police, whispering as I explained what I saw. For a few minutes, everything was silent, and I started doubting myself. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it. Then I heard it again. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor downstairs. That confirmed everything. Someone was inside my house. The sound moved into the living room. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, waiting for the police to arrive. Finally, I saw flashing lights outside. Almost immediately, there was a rush of movement downstairs, followed by the sound of someone running. The officers caught him as he tried to flee back toward the truck parked outside. When they brought him into the light, I recognized him instantly. It was the same man from the store. The realization made everything feel even worse. He hadn't just randomly broken in, he had followed me home. He had been watching me. The police later told me he was armed. He claimed he was just trying to rob the house, but nothing about it made sense. He hadn't taken anything, and he didn't even bring anything to carry items with. It felt far more personal than that. I still don't know how long he had been inside, or what he was really planning to do. That experience stuck with me, but it wasn't the only time something like this happened. Months later, during a road trip, I rented a small cabin for the night. It was isolated, surrounded by trees, with a long gravel driveway leading up to it. The inside was surprisingly nice, recently renovated, and I felt comfortable at first. Not long after settling in, there was a knock at the door. A man stood outside, claiming to be the host, checking if everything was okay. It seemed odd, but not alarming. But when he returned just minutes later and insisted I open the door again, something felt wrong. I refused. After a long silence, I checked the door window and saw no one there. That's when I noticed movement at the side window. He was standing there, staring directly at me. That's when I knew he wasn't the host. I ran to the bedroom and called the police. While waiting, I heard him trying to open the window. By the time officers arrived, he was gone. Later, the real host confirmed no one should have been there. That night taught me something important. Sometimes your instincts notice danger before your mind does. And there were more incidents like that. A man showing up unannounced at a house in the woods, someone trying to break into a cabin in the middle of nowhere with an axe, footprints in the snow leading up to a house and disappearing into the forest, a stranger watching from the darkness. Each time, the situation seemed ordinary at first, but something small felt off. That's the terrifying part about it all. None of these moments started with obvious danger. They all began as normal days, routine actions, simple decisions, going to the store, booking a cabin, answering a knock at the door. But each time there was a moment, a glance, a feeling, a small detail that hinted something wasn't right. And if those warnings had been ignored, things could have turned out very differently. Even now, I think about how easily everything could have gone wrong, how close those situations came to something much worse. The people involved were never fully explained, their intentions were never clear, and in some cases, they were never caught. That's what stays with you the most, not just what happened, but what could have happened. Because the truth is, danger doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes it just looks like an ordinary day until it isn't.